Hello everybody, Kelly Rice here, but I write under the pen name KM Rice, and welcome to my author vlog. First up, I just want to remind you that my brand new series, Afterworld, is launching with the first book, Ophelia, on May 18th. I'm excited, terrified to finally be bringing this story to the public. If you want to be involved in helping me get ready for the launch and doing activities for certain rewards and such, go ahead and join my street team, the Wildling Warriors. I'm putting all the links below for all of that goodness. Okay, so without further ado, here's today's question. You know your phone does that auto-rotate thing and just shot the screen around. Trevor Prime says, a creative writing professor once said that a writer's first novel should be about her childhood. Could you discuss this in a video? Thank you again for your question, Trevor. I know I've answered at least one from you before. This is a tricky one because I agree and yet I don't. Going back to my screenwriting days, the first piece of writing, of big storytelling that I wrote at length was a screenplay. My screenwriting professor advised me to write a quiet story, to write a smaller story, a story about something that I knew. Perhaps a story about yourself, just because autobiographical stories come sort of with built-in characters. You know, you could write about your family, you can write about your friends, you're already writing about the events. And you, of course, in turn, fictionalize them to some extent, but there is a sense of familiarity. You're not trying to do world building on top of it. You're not trying to develop new rules, and you're writing in a genre that is more reality-based. So I do remember my screenwriting, professor giving me that advice. And I followed it because my first few ideas for a screenplay, the way he ran his class is he had us pitch him 2 to 3 spines. So just brief summary of external conflict, that sort of thing. Setting, plot, characters. So he had us pitch 3 different sets of those and advised us on which one he felt would probably be the best direction to head. I remember one of mine was based on a semi-recent trip at the time to South Dakota, where I visited the grave of Red Cloud and the grave of Wild Bill Hickok, the Crazy Horse Memorial, Pine Ridge Reservation, and growing up with these historical Western figures as larger-than-life characters, it was very humbling to be at their resting places and to be in the landscape in which they lived out their lives, and in some of their cases, the final moments of their lives. And to have this profound sense that the West was not there. The West that I had so romanticized growing up, and these people who I'd so looked up to growing up they weren't there either. They weren't at their grave sites. They were more embodied in an idea. I think some of this I explored in The Wild Frontier, for those of you who have read my novella. It's a historical fiction piece about a young girl, not young girl, but a young woman traveling west with her brother, and she has a very similar thirst and hunger and yearning for the frontier and for the wildness that it encompasses. That did in part come from this trip I took to South Dakota, where I'm lucky to have several relatives, and it's a place where my family comes from. Farmers. And realizing that, letting go, not necessarily letting go, but expanding and shifting my concept of what the West is and what the West means to me and what these historical figures mean to me, the fact that going to a place doesn't mean I'm going to find them or find what they embodied, was kind of a pivotal shift in my maturity and growing up, and I wanted to try to write about that, or write about a girl going on a similar journey. And as my professor rightly pointed out, he's like, what's going to be visual about that? How are you going to convey that visually? So instead, I wrote a comedy about My first trip to my school, San Jose State, where I went to pick up my textbooks, and I went with my best friend Katie. And we had quite the adventure that day. We had a lot of silly things happen, a lot of mishaps. We saw a lot of really strange stuff. And it was just kind of a buddy comedy about these two girls facing this big moment in their lives, this change, this time of change, you know, the transition from the summer after your last year of high school into being a college student and what that entailed and what their futures might bring, and, you know, their worries over how their friendship will be tested and such. So I ended up writing a book, excuse me, not a book, a screenplay called Bus Stop, because a lot of it takes place at bus stops, on the bus. The bus is kind of a character in it. For anyone who's used public transport for any period of time, you'll know what I'm talking about. You get to meet very interesting and fascinating people, especially on the buses, at least here in California. And that was my first script. I remember chomping at the bit a little bit. I remember feeling like, boy, I'm gonna have to make up stuff and add stuff and do all this to flesh it out and to make it a more full-fledged story, because as entertaining and funny as it was, it still wasn't, you know, I had bigger stories in me that I wanted to tell. But I am glad that he gave me the advice to start small, because what I was actually learning was the mechanics of storytelling, the mechanics of screenwriting. In that case, this was before I had access to any screenwriting software. I was using Microsoft Word. So in that case, it was literally the formatting, holding your hand up and looking at 3 or 4 finger widths from the side of the page to make sure your dialogue doesn't exceed that. It was painstaking. But when you are trying to learn storytelling, telling a story of length, structure, character development, setting, plot, pacing, and the physical mechanics of formatting, when you're trying to do that all at once for the first time on a piece of length, that sometimes we get overambitious and we think, but I already know all that stuff, I'll be able to do it. That is where it's good to limit yourself a little bit and give yourself permission, especially with your first piece, to write something that doesn't have as lofty of goals as you would like, that doesn't maybe encourage the reader to some version of self-edification or yourself. Like I said, it was a comedy. I just wrote a fun, funny comedy. Granted, my professor was laughing so hard when he was reading it that his daughter, who I think was like 3 at the time, ripped it out of his hand and messed up all the pages because she was like, "What is that, Daddy? What's making you laugh?" And that's probably the greatest compliment I could get. But, so I guess I succeeded in telling that funny story. In my script, I mean. I didn't think I was that funny just right this second on my vlog. I mean, I'm sure some of you like just push play on this vlog every week or whatever it is you watch and just be like, "Ah, what an idiot!" But, you know, that's still serving a purpose in the world, right? Still adding some levity, some edification. So, I do think that you know, what that creative writing professor is probably saying is something of the same ilk. That person is encouraging you to write about what you know, because you are going to be learning so many other tools of the craft and of the trade in the process that you don't want to over encumber yourself by tackling a story that's overly ambitious. So you may have to feel a little boxed in with your first project. You may have to feel like, but this isn't yet what I can do. I know I can do more than this. But I think that is part of the learning process, and that's a good feeling, to feel like you have more to give and to know that you have much more story potential in you. I think that that's a wonderful thing, and you'll have learned some of the tricks of the trade. You'll have seen a project through from beginning, middle, and end to fruition, which is harder than said than done. No, harder done than said. I'm so confused now. My point is that I know a lot of people who write, and some people who write regularly, but they have trouble finishing a project for various reasons. But just finishing a project and sometimes making it a little bit simpler will help you finish it. That's going to be a big notch on your belt and help with your self-confidence as a writer, as a storyteller, help you finding your voice, help you finding your style, even if it's not the story that you want to be known for. Like I've said, I don't think I've ever mentioned Bus Stop before on this vlog. If I have, it was probably just in passing, and I probably didn't give an in-depth description of it because it isn't like the story that I'm known for. You know, I would say at this point it's probably Darkling, but it's still taught me a lot. So writing about your childhood would be a method of sort of having a controlled atmosphere, a controlled characters, controlled world for you to explore while still developing those writing skills. That said, I do not think that that is the only way. I think that if that resonates with you and you feel like you've got a story there, then go for it. But as I've said before in my episode on fanfiction writing, that's where I first got my start. And I think that that was kind of my playing in the sandbox of fiction writing and learning skill sets that I then later applied to my original work. Because you have a pre-made world. Okay, Star Wars. Star Wars was one of the first stories that first fandoms, I guess, that I was writing in. And admittedly, that was largely because I had a massive crush on Ewan McGregor in my teenage years. He was there as Obi-Wan, and then there's Padme, and Natalie Portman was this hero of mine. I just really looked up to her, and I'm like, look at this beautiful man. Look at this beautiful man. I was like 14. I'm like, yeah, man, not the little kid, not Anakin. You don't look that way. Trust me, those are the kids I babysit to this day. Maybe they were only 4 years younger than me. Those are not men. Those are permanently boys in my mind. But rant aside, Star Wars nerd rage. At 14, you think you're a grown-ass woman and like you're looking at Obi-Wan. I'm just saying. Just saying, let's be real. Okay? So I was an Obadala shipper. I don't know if there were many of us. We didn't have Tumblr back in those days. You know, this was like the Stone Age of the internet when we had like message boards and crap. So as an Obadala shipper, I was like, I'm gonna write this Last of the Mohicans-esque story that's this epic romance between Obi-Wan and Padme, and unfortunately, I never actually finished it because I think I just wanted it to keep going. And I don't even remember all of the elements other than they were out in the woods of Naboo. I think that's her planet's name. I'm sorry, I'm rusty on Star Wars these days. I'm a bad fan. I didn't even see the most recent Star Wars movie. I went to the places it was filmed in Ireland just because I happened to be there, and my friends were like, want to go see this? I'm like, okay. But yeah, I'm a bad geek. A lot of you probably just unsubbed right now. Sorry. But I will get around to seeing The Last Jedi at some point. I do vow that. My Padawans. So, long aside short, that was one of the first stories I can really remember putting effort into. I would write it in a notebook before I would type it up and put it on the computer. In the early days of fanfiction.net, I would post it up there. And that I had characters that were created. I had a world that was already created. I had rules to the world and to what the Force can do. The Force is basically magic in that universe. What it can do, what it can't do. What are the social constructs around each character. One is a Jedi Knight. One is supposedly a handmaiden, but it's actually the queen. That sort of thing. What fascinated me by it was the potential behind the characters that they didn't necessarily have on screen. The potential between not just their romance, but the potential of who they might be behind those masks. And I find that that was something I explored a lot in my fan fiction. I do still occasionally write fan fiction, and I'm coming at it from the same point of fascination of I saw a glimmer of something on screen that really fascinated me, and I want to explore it in that character more. It's more looking at the possibilities of what could be rather than what necessarily is, and fleshing out and enriching characters that sometimes you'll feel they were done a disservice on screen because the storytelling medium just is not conducive to in-depth analysis, in-depth exploration of someone's psyche, but you're fascinated. And a lot of times I feel like, especially as a girl, and as a young girl, like I just said, I had a crush on the character. And I probably wanted to make him more noble and romanticize him, and you would call it a Mary Jane story. Wait, okay, a Mary Jane story is more when if I like took myself right now and plot myself in Middle Earth or in Star Wars or something like that. But there is a vicarious romance going on, right? Through a female character I identify with, I'm romancing this male character. And that is the crux. I didn't mean to bring this up, but I'm bringing it up now, folks. That is the crux of any good romance. For either gender to be able to put themselves in the shoe of one of the partners and romanticize the other character. I mean, there is a sense of fantastical voyeurism going on in romance. And, you know, one of the tips I learned from my friend Marina Adair, who's a fantastic category romance author, was women do not read romance books to find out about the other women. They're reading them to find out about the man, you know? And I'm talking straight situations among heterosexual characters. So I would be reading a romance novel more fascinated with the guy and what are his quirks and what are his characteristics, what does he look like, ooh, how chiseled are those abs, than I am about, wow, she's cool, she's empowered, she's this, she's that. That said, if you have that too, that's kind of the icing on the cake. I'm also not a reader of category romance. This is just a tip that was given to me that I could completely get behind and understand. And I see it in, like I just said, I see it in my own work, especially when I was younger, and probably now. I'm sure it's going on now, but it's just so second nature to me that I'm not consciously doing it. Well, look at Tristan. I won't say much more than that. Look at the beginning. Look at how you meet Tristan and Willow in his description from Willow's point of view. That's all I'll say, because I don't want to spoil things for people who haven't read the book Darkling. But I'll leave it at that. So that was a little tangent that I didn't mean to go off of, but hopefully it'll help some of you. I hope that my tangents are more productive than distracting, but if they're distracting, I hope they're at least entertaining. So, I do think that fanfiction is a way to build those storytelling muscles that I was talking about earlier, because it's the same concept of you're writing in something familiar and something confined. The benefit of fanfiction that you won't get from just writing something cold is that you will get immediate feedback. If you choose to share it, that is. If you put it up on a site like fanfiction.net, you can post it chapter by chapter, always end with a cliffhanger. And it's like serializing a work, you know, like what Charles Dickens used to do in the papers. And you'll get reviews. And especially when you're starting off as a writer, those are incredibly helpful because they boost your self-esteem, they let you know what you're doing right. If there are moments that feel out of character, a lot of times other fans will say, there's absolutely no way they would say that or do that, and either you've slipped up or you were trying to, okay, because like I said, my fascination was always taking the characters as they were and presenting them as they could be. If I did that right, nothing's going to feel out of character because the reader has come to my story from the beginning and gone on the journey and familiarized themselves with my version of that character that they already know well. And if it feels authentic to them, they're not going to have a problem with it. If it feels forced, I've read a lot of fan fictions where the changes that they've made to the characters just feel like, no, you're just projecting here and you didn't do enough build up to this. I'm not buying it, you're not selling it. Then that's where, you know, sometimes it's like, maybe you just won't read it. I mean, you don't have to, it's a fan fiction, but that's where I think it feels off. So I do always recommend writing fan fiction if you like it, if you find that you're geeky like I am, and I think that's a great place to start. And you will, I'm saying this now years, like a decade, almost 2 decades later, probably, oh my gosh, I'm old, yeah, almost 2 decades later, that I can recognize that what I was doing while writing that fan fiction, it was just fun for me. It was fulfilling for me, and it was being part of a community. And yes, gaining a lot of confidence as a storyteller that I didn't realize would ever serve me, ever. I had no idea I would become a writer. It was just something I did that was fun, writing. That I was building the muscles to build characters of my own. So by kind of putting on the costume, like cosplay, of, say, Amidala, Padme, I am exploring facets of her character that I felt maybe were there and you didn't even see on screen, but that's because I am projecting what I want and my sensibilities and whatever for what makes a good character onto that character and exploring it in a place that is safe and safe in terms of I'm not taking risks, other big storytelling risks. So I'm growing little by little. So I definitely recommend writing fan fiction if that catches your fancy. As you don't have to do it as you just do it if it's fun. you don't have to do it as like, this is a serious writing exercise and blah, blah, blah. You know, I met friends on fanfiction.net and I'd be like, oh my god, I love your story, this or that. And they'd be like, oh, it was just a character study. You know, I have my own stuff that's so much, you know, better, and fanfiction is trash. And it's like, no, it was still good writing. You don't need to have an excuse for it. If it's fun, do it, you know? And, writing about your childhood, again, if that sounds fun and a safer place for you to explore and grow those storytelling muscles, then do it. If you know, it doesn't have to be childhood, just life experiences, something where you are somewhat limited in the scope of your storytelling, because you will want to start charging out the gate like a racehorse. But you might need to spend a little bit more time in the corral. You might need to spend a little bit more time in the stall, munching on your hay. So that, in that way, that is how I do agree, Trevor, with that creative writing professor's advice. It's not what everyone wants to hear. It certainly wasn't what I wanted to hear when I started out, but it was very beneficial. And I will say that Bus Stop was my first screenplay. And like I said, it was a quiet story. It was a comedy. My second screenplay was Andromache, and that was about the fallen queen of Troy, who was taken as a slave back to Hellas, Greece, and fights her way away from her captor, tries to regain her lost sense of self, goes to the island of Crete among the Minoans, rises in their society, regains power, finds new love, volcano blows up, all that good stuff. Andromache was the second script I ever wrote. It was one of the stories I originally had kicking around in my imagination ever since I read the Iliad. And it started winning me screenwriting competitions in the state and then nationwide. That is a shocking... I still look back at that and can't believe it happened to me. But that is a shocking result for your second ever effort at writing a script. But I do not think I could have done that and done it so successfully if I hadn't written Bus Stop first. If I had tried to start with Andromache, too big of a story, too much world building, too much history, it would have been too much to bite off at once. But by starting with the first script, which took a lot of drafts, I don't remember how many, again, this was so long ago, but I know I went back and forth with my professor a lot, and that's really good too. You're not going to do it right the first time. You know, you need that feedback to know what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. Okay, let me improve on that. And then, you know, your mentor or your professor or whoever it is, maybe you'll end up working with me, because I am available now as a freelance editor and free feedback provider, consultant, if you will, to see how you are growing and getting stronger in those ways. And that's incredibly beneficial to you as a writer. So don't be afraid to stumble, don't be afraid to fail, because there truly is no failing. You are just learning, and so long as you're learning, you're growing. And that's a wonderful state to be in. So, on the subject of growing, I have this really cool candle that I'll sign off with. It is the Green Man. It comes with a pewter pendant of the Green Man, who symbolizes growth, because we are entering spring, and it is a great time to start projects. So if you do have some story of your childhood or fan fiction or anything like that kicking around, now might be a great time to start it. As always, folks, don't forget to subscribe if you find that you are enjoying this and want to be notified when each video goes up. You can also support this vlog for $1 on Patreon. That's it, $1 a month. And yes, remember, Ophelia is coming. Join my street team, get in on the fun, get in on the action, and let's help bring this thing to life. Okay, guys, from me and my Celtic Visions Green Man candle, I bid you all a very fond farewell. Who knew he smells so good?